got a bad habit with my bad habits. It's like I see everything that I need, but I just can't grab it. I always let bad things take over me, man, I'm a damn addict. Cause the highs feel better than the lows, but it only get worse, better let it all go. Each dose I take, I feel the same. Just ease my temporary pain. But just like you, it always fades. I hope one day I turn the page, baby, it's fate. Maybe I showed up a little too late, baby. I'm slipping, I'm tripping on skates lately. I'm stir crazy, it stays shady outside. Yeah, so I don't come around y'all too often. Feeling exhausted, baby, I'm off it. Everything changed when I turned it caution. Have caution, bear with me, I'm growing. But I couldn't grow with you, it's cool, I'm fine, I'm chillin', I'm stoic. I can't save you before I save myself, baby, I'm not that heroic. I gotta get where I'm going, I still gotta fix what's broken. Each dose I take, I feel the same. Just ease my temporary pain. But just like you, it always fades. I hope one day I turn the page. Each dose I take, I feel the same. Just ease my temporary pain. But just like you, it always fades. I hope one day I turn the page.
Hello, welcome back, Tone Deaf Monk. Today I am sharing with you another DAP, and this one is the Activo. If you're not familiar with who they are a Korean company, and they are the sub-brand offshoot of Astle and Kern, just without the name. And I think you would do this if you wanted to bring a less expensive player to the market and do a broader audience as well. And for that, that's pretty cool. I like to see it very much. Now, let's talk about this little player. I'll throw out some boring specs for you. Has a ES9219Q, so a little bit older Saber DAC. It doesn't use the chip built into the DAC. It uses their own Astle and Kern Teraton. Yep, it's a Teraton Alpha amp, which is renowned for its clean output. Yes, it does. Available 64 gigabytes on board, but I find only 41 gigabytes are actually accessible to you. It's full Android, that's clear. What version? I have no idea, couldn't find out. Well, I did look, but I couldn't find it. Now, the DSD, this is interesting. It goes up to DSD 256, and what I found was interesting is if you had 64-bit, 1-bit, or 128, it would actually upsample everything to 256 DSD. Bluetooth 5.3, and yes, all the codecs, aptX, HD, LDAC, away you go. All audio codecs as well, so WAV, FLAC, MP3, WMA, DSF, DFF, MQA on board, but who cares? The battery 2700 milliamp hours with the PD 3.0 protocol fast charging, which is nice as well. So it only takes about an hour and a half to get to full charge, and they say it lasts about 20 hours. I couldn't really test that. This was a loaner from my friend Kevin from the Canuck Audioholics. Thank you very much, Kevin, for the loaner, and he loaned me his R4 as well when I was doing some other testing, which I greatly appreciate. Now, the Activo P1 is selling for about $430 US. So that's why I thought in this little review, I would also throw it up against some also mid-priced, mid-tier DACs and see how it does. And I'm also going to compare it to a couple other players in this review as well. I've got the iBasso DX180 selling for $529. The Shanling M5 Ultra, $589. The Hiby R6iii, that sells for $429. And the Cayin N3 Ultra at $529. So it's in some good competition. And let's get into this review and talk a little bit more about it and see how it stacks up. Couple things about this player. It's light, and that's one of the things that they do say in their marketing materials. 155 grams, and it fits really nicely in your hand as well. And I'll talk about fit, feel, and finish. And it's not too big, it's not too wide. That's what I liked about the N3 Ultra from Cayin as well, is it just, with a narrower design instead of a wider, it actually feels really good in your hand, but this one's actually quite skinny as well. So it's got this strange bulbous top on it as well. It's kind of like this weighty gray color, which I would be worried about it getting dirty. I mean, I don't think this one's been used very much already, and I'm going to have to wipe it down before I give it back to Kevin here. The bottom is aluminum. It's really nice. They obviously do this for the antennas, the Wi-Fi, and the Bluetooth, which makes sense. On the top of the unit, you see your 3.5 single-ended and your 4.4 balanced. On the bottom, you have your USB-C centered and your micro card slot as well. On the left side, you have a plus and minus that is for your volume control. And then on the other side, you have your power on off and your function key, which I will talk about as well. Well, let's talk about that right now. I got a picture I'll pull up. You notice one thing about every other DAC that I have sitting here is they all have a dedicated key for fast forward and rewind. Sorry, that's kind of old school, but previous and next track, and a play pause button that's dedicated, where this one has kind of that button that you get on like those wired microphones, right? I'm not a fan at all. I actually went backwards. I can go backwards to the previous track, but I couldn't actually go forward to the next track. So maybe it's just me, but I do not like it at all. I wish there was a dedicated, there's lots of room for that, but they chose not to. And I understand why they did it. Their whole thing is like, let's make it more easy to use with one hand. And that, yes, in that instance, yes, it does work. And one thing they do say too is each one of their buttons is very different, and it's tactile, so you can actually feel the function. What's the button do? And I really do like that. That was well thought out. So Activo, good job on that one. It has the double tap to wake. I like that feature very much as well. Now, some, like the iBasso, can't do that. Yeah, see, has it. Because of the screen limitation, they chose to go with a Sharp branded screen and make a better screen, but it lost that function. I'm okay with that as well, because it has a giant function key with the volume control. So like some of the other features I'm just going to talk about that I liked in using this DAP, and I'm about not just sound, it also has to be functional. When you load music onto the card or the player itself, one thing that Astle and Kern DAPs always do is auto update the database. You don't have to do anything, so it scans it in the background. That's a really nice feature that sometimes gets passed over, doesn't get mentioned enough, but they do it quite well. Now, this is, of course, a custom Android skin on top of the Android base layer as well. So some things are done a little bit differently, and we'll talk about the UI here in a bit. One thing that I was come across this, I was trying to find the dark mode. The screen is really bright. It's like, right? Where's the dark mode? I couldn't find it. I searched the internet. No one seems to be able to find it as well. So I'm in good company. Overall, I find the UI quite, and they do boast about their squares and circles, and the Astral and Kerns have always been, or even their sub-brands have also had a good element of design in them as well. It wasn't just, here's a square brick with some buttons on it. It had some design elements that made it stand out, whether it be square edges or angled screens or what have you. This is no exception in the Activo P1 as well. So overall, I do find the UI and the software a very similar experience to my older Astral and Kern Con Max, but newer and more polished, I would think, as well. Though I do prefer the usage and the UI of the Cayin Max. I really do. I think it's really good and probably one of the best I've used. And it's a very similar experience to if you have an Astral and Kern already, it's not too far off a learning curve. It's kind of basic. It's functional. Not that intuitive, I will say. Let's see here. Close all. When you're presented with the, wow, that screen, let me see if I can turn that down. There. You get this basic thing, and it did take me a while to actually, and I like that scroll function. There's your circles and squares and all that happy jab. It's pretty fast and speedy. But to get to stuff, I found it's not that intuitive, though it's okay. But who really cares when you have a full Android player? You could put a different player on. You could put whatever you wanted on this Activo P1, whether it be Hiby software or what have you. You have that ability. So it's a non-issue if you don't like the factory skinned player. It has the full Astral and Kern PEQ. Now, I'm not going to go into that as well. It is a full PEQ, but again, there is a learning curve to it. If you're an EQer, then you would probably just go to the Hiby software and use that because it's way easier to use with the auto EQ import into the PEQ function. This one is, again, a little harder to use. I don't like it. I don't use it on my Con Max just because I don't find it very intuitive, and the saves and that kind of stuff. So now in this next section, and we get into more of the sound signature as well in this comparison. So some of the gear that I had used to test this, I used the Let's Shure S12 and the little planar IM. It's kind of bright on the top end. I wanted to see how it did there. My Alpha Omega Omegas, beautiful IM. It's the nicest I've ever heard of any IM. I used Oravetti's Low Master, very neutral, balanced IM, and I was using that to see how much coloration it has from this player and its sound signature. My Hi-Fiman HE400Is as well, so I used some headphones to also test it. Now, just talking about the P1, its sound signature, before I get into different comparisons, my overall thoughts on how does this player sound? Well, it sounds very clean. It sounds Astral and Kern clean, very detailed, sparkly. It does have a very much more relaxed bottom end and a brighter, neutral bright top end, with the upper mids being placed noticeably forward in the mix. And that comes to play when in the pairings and the synergies that you have for your gear. So if you had an overly forward bright IM, let's your S12, wowie factor. Okay. So let's first let's shoot the P1 up against some players and see how it did. So first up, iBasso DX180, $529, gets you Android 13, gets you 4 gigs RAM, gets you 128 gigabytes of onboard memory. So over double the memory. And yes, this player is $100 more than the P1. What you get in sound signature versus the two in my testing, you get a bigger stage, you get a more open stage with the DX180 noticeably. Highs are more controlled. One thing about the iBasso DX180 is it renders highs beautifully, but it doesn't add coloration into the mix. It renders highs beautifully, but it doesn't overemphasize anything. It doesn't add to your music, and that's where the Activo P1 kind of did a little bit in comparison, for sure. You got treble glare with the S12 on the P1, where the iBasso controlled that very nicely. The P1 vocals also sound definitely more, not just more forward, but more veiled as well in comparison to the DX180. Though the P1 does have very natural, I find, very natural vocals, very natural instrumental playback. And when I was listening to the DX180 versus the P1, one of the things I noticed, big things I noticed, was in the bass department, where the DX180 not only pulls down much lower, it is more tighter and controlled and more balanced in the mix, for sure, where this one again was bass shy, and there was the emphasis on the upper mids and treble. So when you were listening to instrumentals, or you could tell that the DX180 was a more balanced overall, neutral sounding, uncolored, I would say, versus the Activo P1. That let's throw up another one here, and this is going to be now the Shanling M5 Ultra. So this is definitely, with the AKM DAX, warmer. It is smoother, and that's the house sound of Shanling, by the way. There's more body in the lower mids, for sure. Smaller stage, bigger bass. Top end as not as controlled as the DX180 and not as bright as the P1. It was somewhere in between. I find that the M5 Ultra has the special sauce in the bottom end, adding some thickness and some warmth to the bottom end, keeps the mids very neutral, very uncolored, and again, nice sparkly top end without exaggeration. And you could tell again, switching between the two, where this one's adding in not so much coloration into the upper mids and treble, just presents it more forward, so you get more information up there. And what happens there when you're listening to the two, say if you were listening to female vocals would absolutely pop out in front of you. But also what happens is because you're getting more information in that area, it's also recessing the bass as well. So you're getting an upper mid-centric focus where everything else is kind of subdued in the background a little bit. and even though instruments sound correct, they're maybe not as prominent as you would think they would be if you know that particular track. Like, I go over the same tracks in my test playlist over and over again, so I know how they sound. And it's super interesting when you're comparing different sources, because they really all do sound, they have their own signature. They do honestly sound different. I can hear the difference between every single one of these players. Now, let's go to the Hiby R6iii. Now, I haven't listened to this in a while, to be quite honest, and I thought I knew its sound signature, but then I'd be wrong, because in comparison, and I always thought that these ones were mid-forward, they would be, and I thought they were, again, an emphasis on the upper mids, and they were mid-forward and bright, but that is not how it sounded in comparison to these other players. It does actually have a bit of mid-forwardness, as I find all Hiby products do. That's kind of a bit of their house signature. And it does push vocals a bit out front as well, like the P1, but not as much. And one of the things that I found in testing all these players is that this one had Hiby had the most compressed soundstage and the least resolving of all of them. You could pick out the nuances and the details of, like, Teeth Don't Go, the live track that I use from Nils Lofgren. On the R6iii was more masked. You really couldn't, well, you could pick out the details because you knew what you were listening for, but it definitely wasn't as nuanced. The strings, the resonances, the harmonics coming off the strings, and his vocal tonality was not as defined and clear and crisp on the Hiby. It does have, in comparison, the deepest bass, the sub bass out of all. Kind of surprised me, because I didn't have my head wrapped around the sound signature of the R6iii. I think I did a review a while ago, but I didn't really have any other sources at the time, or not very much at all, to do a comparison to get more of its sound signature. And that's the interesting thing when you're doing DAP reviews, is you can listen to something, but you need a reference. You need something to compare to, against, to really wrap your head around its sound signature. So that's why I feel very blessed to have as many sources, or I can borrow some from friends. So, and the R6iii had great pairings. And of course, it had a great pairing with the S12. I wonder why, because it didn't make it so overly bright. It controlled the highs quite a bit, and it was a good pairing with that IM as well. So, be a good pairing with overly bright IMs, or IMs that had, it needed some oomph in the upper mids, or it needed some oomph to the bottom end, and that's where the R6iii could benefit. They were kind of like they're two opposite players' sound signature. You know, here the upper mid's bright forward, and here this was more laid back and more chill, less resolving, kind of more organic sounding. I should also say in my review how I got these. Well, I was using high-res files from Tidal on all these players, except for when it came to doing the comparison to the Cayin N3 Ultra, because it doesn't have Wi-Fi or streaming or any of that. So I was using then DSD files for the comparison. So, but everything else was Tidal and FLAC, and of course I still used some onboard my high-res files, DSD and FLAC, from my memory cards. So The P1 in comparison to the R6iii, just to wrap that up, sounds cleaner in the mids and more dynamic and more energetic than the Hiby. The Hiby again sounds kind of laid back, and probably the least natural sounding vocals out of all the DAPs that I'm comparing to today. Finally, last up, again, let's talk about the. So that Hiby was also 429, I should have mentioned, and I was using it on Class A mode, and anytime that had filters, I was also putting it on the same filter as well, so, or close to as I could. Back to the Cayin N3 Ultra here. It was an interesting one. Here you could clearly hear how the P1 projects vocals forward with a upper mids emphasis, for sure, a boost. It does make vocals pop out on the P1. But also pushes the bass back in the mix, where the N3 Ultra, and here I was using it on modern tube mode, and I also tried it on a solid state, but I like it on modern tube mode. In that it's more balanced, it's more smooth, and it's $100 more again than the. It has kind of three, I think, fairly distinct tonalities: modern tube mode, classic tube mode, which is kind of the more of the tubey sound, and then the solid state mode. So kind of an interesting comparison to all of those, and I really got a good feel of the sound signature of the Activo P1. So I hope that came across with how it sounded with its sound signature. To wrap this review up of the Activo P1, $429. It has a lot of great things going for it. Nice screen, great battery life, fit and finish, build quality, feel in your hand, usage. It does it all very well, as you would expect from any Astle & Kern or sub-brand thereof. So they did a pretty good job. And at $429, if its sound signature sounds like it would work for you, I would say it's a pretty darn good player. It doesn't have too many knocks against it, and a lot of positive things going for this player. For me, there's a couple things that I wouldn't buy this player. For me, I'm a big volume control wheel fan myself. I hate the pushy up down. Not a fan of that. So for me, that has it. This function key without the dedicated forward and reverse function, again, not my favorite. It's just something I don't like at all. I don't like not having a dark mode, and it might have it, but honestly, if I have to search that hard to find it, that's not a good thing. And I looked, I went through everything on this player, and I couldn't find it. I searched online. I had my friends, Kevin, searched online. He couldn't find it either, so don't think it has it. So that kind of stuff, for me, is the knocks against this player and why I wouldn't buy it. But again, if those things are not important to you and its sound signature sounds like something that you would like, then the Activo P1 is something you might want to consider. I think that's it for this review. I thank you for watching. Much appreciated and much love. This is the Tone Deaf Monk. Until tomorrow, while I try to catch up on everything.